My name is Laura Rodriguez. I am the Florida organizer for Jews for a Secular Democracy. I'm also the state policy advocate for the National Council of Jewish Women. I chair the Florida Courts Matter Coalition and Pro-Truth Florida, which is a campaign against the fake clinics throughout our country. And I want to welcome everyone. I applaud you for joining us this evening, and thank you for participating. Please note that we are a 501c3 organization. We don't support any particular party or candidates for office, and we ask everyone who is participating in this call to respect that throughout this webinar. I'd like to I also let you know that this is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel afterwards. So again, be mindful of how you participate in this webinar. Tonight's webinar is entitled Christian Nationalism, Florida, a Warning for the Nation. Focuses on what Christian nationalism is, how its growing influence has affected Florida public policy and the environment in our public spaces, and what we can do as people of faith to demonstrate its insidious nature and threat to our democracy. I want to thank our sponsors, the Eula May and John Bow Foundation and Jews for a Secular Democracy, and thank you to our co-sponsors, the Society for Humanistic Judaism, Congregation Beth Adam of South Florida, Or Adam Congregation in Phoenix, Temple Israel of Orlando, Keshet and CJW Miami, and Florida Now. I'd like to introduce you to our, well, first I'll let you know about myself, but I want to introduce you to our panelists. We first have, by a happy accident, we have Representative Michele Rayner joining us. We had our program initially was Representative Escamani was going to be joining us, but things beyond our control intervened, and we have another fabulous speaker for us. Michele represents House District 62 of the state of Florida, and she is a civil rights and social justice attorney, and she made history in 2020 when she was elected as the first openly queer gay Black member of the Florida legislature and immediately established herself as one of the strongest advocates for underserved communities. In her first term, she brought back resources to communities in the Tampa Bay area by making legislative alliances across the aisle while challenging the governor and her colleagues in the Florida legislature. Now she's ready to do more for her constituents by bringing their fight back to Tallahassee. Michele was raised by a family of changemakers in Pinellas County. Her parents both integrated the University of South Florida in the early 1960s, with her mother going on to become one of the first Black social workers in St. Petersburg, and her father successfully putting himself through engineering school while working in a warehouse. Her parents established themselves as community leaders and set an example for Michele with their dedication to service. One of our other panelists, Rabbi Joshua Neely, was born and raised in San Diego, California, has also lived in London, Tokyo, Los Angeles, Baltimore, and Jerusalem. His family has a long history of leaving Spain and wandering around like many of us Jewish people. He found his branch of his family found its way back to Judaism in the 1960s. He's been settled in Winter Springs as part of the greater Orlando area for the past 15 years with his wife and 2 children. He serves Temple Israel, a progressive conservative synagogue. In addition to serving the needs of his synagogue, he is a passionate advocate for religious freedom and overcoming hate in all its forms. He's a frequent participant in community events and has also created a large library of educational and inspirational videos. And lastly, but not least, our, sorry, getting my papers are mixed up. I'm so sorry. Pastor Jim Coffin is a semi-retired pastor. He currently looks after a small non-denominational congregation, Markham Woods, in Apopka, Florida. Prior to his current position, he served as executive director of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida from 2011 to 2022. From 1991 to 2011, he was a member of the pastoral staff at Markham Woods Church of Seventh-day Adventists in Longwood, Florida, spending 18 years of that time as a senior pastor. Coffin earlier spent 9 years in youth ministry and 9 years as an editor of Seventh-day Adventist publications. Throughout his professional career, he has frequently written articles and has been featured on major news outlets, including the New York Times, Washington Post, and CBS News. And thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to move on with our first question. Is going to be to Rabbi Neely. Could you please give us a 101 on your understanding of what Christian nationalism is and what it is not?
Thank you, Laura. And I'm just very honored to be participating in this with my co-panelists, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them as well as to all of our participants. So Christian nationalism is a very confusing topic because it doesn't reflect Christianity, and it doesn't really reflect the patriotism that is often dressed up as the cover for nationalist ideology. So I have to start off by giving my apologies to many practicing and believing Christians, although I'm going to continue to use the term Christian nationalist because it is a term used within the movement and academically to describe it. Please understand that I am not trying to paint everybody into that same position. There are many distinctions between mainstream Christianity and this movement, as I'm sure Pastor Coffin will go into in much more detail. But I want to make sure that everybody understands that from the outset. So what actually is it? Well, it is a constellation of ideas, and not every Christian nationalist ascribes to every single one of the ideas, but there are a couple of central pillars. The first is that they hold to an idea that the United States was founded by Christians with an expressed wish and determination that it be a Christian country. Now, that idea is false. While it is true that there were some early colonists that did have definite religious intention and did want to create their own communities that were exclusively driven by their own Christian identity, the fact was that there was no homogenous colonizing spirit of one version of Christianity. And in fact, the vast majority of those who came to this country, and especially those who framed the Constitution and helped craft it into the document that we still use as a governing document, were emphatically opposed to the notion of establishing a state religion. They had seen the wars of Europe that had ravaged for centuries and killed millions, and they wanted nothing to do with that. And so instead, they were focused on protecting the free exercise of religion and preventing the establishment of a state religion. However, Christian nationalists disagree. They view in their own nostalgic view of an imagined past that the early days of America were crafted under this religious umbrella that was wholly Christian in its outlook. And while different Christian nationalists will have varying degrees of antagonism to non-Christians, they all agree that this country was founded by and should be run for the benefit of Christians, and that others, if tolerated at all, should receive second-class status. Now, what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it means that many of them believe that the laws and rules governing our land should flow directly out of their interpretation of Christianity and should be imposed upon others, whether Christian or not. And to understand why they believe that, apart from this false founding ideology, we have to understand the second main pillar of most Christian nationalists. That second pillar is an idea that something has gone wrong in the country, that the country went down the wrong track, that it was drifting away from the ideal that they held dear. They believe that there is a degradation of American society, that there is a reducing of American morality, that there is a drifting within the American psyche. And they believe that all of this has to do with a drifting away from Christianity. Again, they hold to the idea that at some previous time, everything was much better, that people were more moral, people were more civil, people hewed to the right path in more closely. And the belief is that the current problems that we experience are attributable to a decline in the religiosity of the nation. That as people stop going to church, as people stop allowing church law to be implemented in the public sphere, that is what has given rise to the challenges that we face. Now, to understand those challenges, we have to sort of break it into two groups. There are the challenges on the social issues, which of course become very political almost instantly. Issues such as abortion rights or sexual orientation or gender identity are often favorite places for them to beat a drum, believing that because America has become, in their opinion, more permissive of these false choices, that we are seeing other impacts as well. Now, the last part is a little bit hard to understand because you may not be in the right mindset. The logic follows, and it's not great logic, but please bear with me, that if my reading of the Bible says that abortion or other forms of social actions are wrong, and yet I live in a society that allows it, then essentially the society has given permission to sin. And once the society has given permission to sin, then I feel that others are going to abuse that permissiveness. That once we have made the decision that something that I view that shouldn't be allowed in society is allowed, then people are going to say, ha ha, all bets are off, I can do as I please, and therefore I can descend into a licentious, hedonistic, criminal lifestyle, and that is the root of all the problems. Now, it should be important to note, and hopefully most of the attendees already realize this, but as a matter of fact, we are living in one of the better times within our communities, not only for the individual freedoms that are shared by a much larger swath of our population, but even by most of the economic measures, as well as the social measures that most of us would hold dear. Crime is down. The incidents of interpersonal or spousal or child abuse are down. We may spend a lot of attention on it, but we are living in a better time by most objective measures. But if I feel like my status in society has been degraded because I used to have a privileged place, I used to have a position in a hierarchy of the community that was not earned, but was granted purely by my religious status, then the fact that there is greater equality feels like an infringement upon myself. And thus we see many of them wondering what went wrong, when all that went wrong was that we began to level it for more of us. And that then leads them to explain that the real problem must be this lack of religion within the United States public sphere. Now, that last part then is where we get to the nationalist policy of all of this. There is nothing wrong with an individual believing that they themselves should live according to a particular interpretation of the Bible. Each and every member of the United States can choose for him or herself whether they wish to follow a Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, Muslim, or atheist path in their life. However, with regards to Christian nationalists, they believe that since this problem is now a societal ill, that the only solution is coercion towards implementing religious law of their preference within the public sphere. This is not about protecting their right to live personally as they wish. This is about their attempt to implement what they wish into the lives of everyone else. And that is a fundamental challenge. And the issue, of course, that we are dealing with here in Florida and in many other parts of the country, where people are attempting to pass legislation, and in many places have already passed legislation that implements their particular view, which is enshrined in their unique reading of the Bible, and from which the rest of us then have to live under that. Now, there are other elements of Christian nationalism that is out there. Many of them are also racist. Many of them are anti-Semitic. Many of them dabble in other types of hatred. And much of this is being played out in their antagonism to free speech. They are often big proponents of censorship. This is also playing out in their attempt to separate the society into different groups. The school voucher system, school choice system is one of their favorites in order to drive people into different categories where the right-thinking people can be away from the wrong people, and to, of course, give a second-class status to the wrong people in the process. So that's
Thank
really
you.
the 101. More than happy to go into any additional detail that people come up with in the Q&A portion, but hopefully that gives you a basic idea. But I do want to just remind you, as a quick summary, Christian nationalism is fundamentally a nostalgia for an imagined past where a dominant version of Christianity allowed the coercion of the public sphere to create a more ideal society. It is fundamentally a flawed view of history. It is a fundamentally flawed view of how societies operate, and it is at complete odds with what has made our country great and what hopefully will continue to make our country even greater in the future.
Yes, thank you so much, Rabbi Neely, and I agree with you. And I would add that another underlying uh, part of the movement is that it's very misogynistic and male men are the dominant force or should be the dominant force. Anyway, so um, Representative Rayner, welcome, welcome. Um, I'd like to ask you how you have experienced Christian nationalism, like in action as you're working in Tallahassee. I've been there. There's a prayer breakfast that imitates the national prayer breakfast, etc. And we'd like to know what happens in Tallahassee that it reflects this movement.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here. And it is a happy accident. Thank you. I am happy to be here with my other panelists. Rabbi, thank you so much for that really thoughtful answer and definition to Christian nationalism. So, one of the things I think is super important to know as a Black queer woman, I also am a divinity school dropout and come from a long line of pastors and Christian leaders in my family. So one of the things I actively do is I actively push back against Christian nationalism that is reflected in the State House through legislation by actually reframing the actual words of Jesus and what it means when we're looking and when we're framing it out of what we would call a liberation theology. And basically, for those who don't know, understand what liberation theology is, it's very simply the idea and belief that all of us are able to get free. And if the least of us are free, then all of us are free. And we can delve into the different aspects and types of those types of it. But James Cone, theologian, was the one that kind of really brought this into a the more of a more early or more recent forefront, but starting with Howard Thurman. So, kind of with that framing, you see Christian nationalism show up not only in the bills that are filed, but how people speak about the policies and bills that were filed. I think it's interesting to note that what we're seeing reflected in Project 2025 actually started here in Florida. Florida was the testing ground for many of the things that we're seeing reflected in Project 2025. Into the rabbi's point, it is basically a reminiscing of going back to the good old days. I would like to know what the good old days are, because the good old days for my people are not necessarily the good old days for other folks, right? And so, and I say that sitting at the intersection of being a cis woman, sitting at the intersection of being queer, and sitting at the intersection of being Black, right? So sitting at those three intersections, all of the communities that I represent and identify with, the good old days were not great for any of us, right? So that's number one. Number two is that you see folks legislating their Christian belief, right? So, for example, whether you have legislators, when we were had the Don't Say Gay bill, that part one and part two that was being presented on the House floor, that um at the time I was married to my ex-wife, and I was looked at a legislator looked me in my face on the House floor and basically told me that my marriage was not as valid as his marriage to a woman. Not also, we could get into the discussion how he got married to that woman, but that's neither here nor there. And so so you see that, and use the Bible and use Christianity and Christian nationalism to do that. You also have this strange allegiance to to the United States, in the sense of where any critique of the United States is it is almost aligned with faith, if that makes sense. And any critique of that is, if you're critiquing God or if you're critiquing the country, it doesn't stand. And I believe James Baldwin said, I love America so much, that's why I critique her. And I any critique of anything that is not white, Christian, cis, het, Republican, rich, wealthy male is not accepted. And what you also see, that I think that Christian nationalism shows up in the legislature, it's about domination, really. It's about domination of women's bodies, femmes' bodies. It's about domination of how people identify, how they show up. It's about domination of history and the rewriting thereof. And we see that domination even trickling down to legislation that was passed that would give the governor the ability to erase murals that are here in obviously most certainly in Orlando, but also here in St. Petersburg as well, and throughout the state. So really, Christian nationalism shows up in control and domination in the type of legislation that is passed, whether it is the legislation that was seeking to ban transgendered people from being able to have their markers on their driver's license that they identify with. Just because you don't understand, you don't have to understand. You just have to accept it, right? It's not for me to understand. It's not for that. No one's they're asking, people are asking to be respected. And it's so interesting to me that these same people want their faith to be, and I say this as a Christian, want their faith to be respected and honored, but yet you can't do that for anyone else who thinks differently than you. And then have the audacity to enshrine those ideals that not everybody agrees with in legislation, and legislation that at times is harm, and not at times, most of the time is harmful to not only the people who may identify with you as Christians, but also other people who may not identify, but because it's the belief that the way they think is preeminent, the way they think is most important. And it really is, honestly, on its face, Christian nationalism is part and parcel of white supremacy.
Yes. Thank you, Michelle. I agree with you. uh Thank you. Pastor Coffin, as a fellow organizer of an interfaith coalition, how can we best ensure that not only do we understand one another, but that we are working together effectively to educate the community about Christian nationalism and find ways to combat it? And how does your understanding of Christianity differ from Christian nationalism?
Okay. First of all,
That was a lot
I'd
of
like to say,
questions.
I'm sorry I didn't catch that.
That was a lot of questions in one.
Yes, and I may not get all of them answered, you know, but I'd like to say a big thank you to both of our previous speakers because I think they really outlined the situation substantially so that there's already a fairly good picture of it. I would suggest that well, let me back up just a bit here. Um, all of the panelists that you have are in some way a minority, and some may be a minority in more than one way. And so I think that minorities have an understanding of things because they aren't always in the power seat. And so they have an understanding of how significantly those in the power seat can affect others. And so if you're in the majority, and all of us are probably in some kind of majority, and most of us in some kind of minority, but particularly if that minority that we're in plays a major role in our life, then we understand the negative potential more than a lot of people would. And so the majority, the Christian majority, they're coasting along, and everything seems to go well for them, and you know they pretty much get what they want. I say this as a Christian, pretty much get what we want, and we don't understand why others don't just automatically fall in line with what it is that we want. I mean, it worked well for us. Why shouldn't it work for them? And it's not always hatred and animosity. A lot of it is indifference and ignorance. And so there are a lot of people who are quite supportive of Christian nationalism, at least in its rudimentary forms, because they've never really stopped to think about what the implications really are. And if you're, you know, if you're a Christian and, you know, Christians have the gospel commission to go out and tell the whole world about Jesus. And here's an opportunity to get into the public schools and to utilize an existing structure to tell the world about Jesus. And a lot of people have just never stopped to think about, well, what kind of position does that put the Jew in? What kind of position does it put the Hindu in, the atheist, whoever it might be? They've just never stopped to think about it. So they jump on the bandwagon, at least partially, supporting Christian nationalism because it just sounds good and, well, why not? Because they're part of that Christian majority. In terms of how we can work together, I think education is a huge thing. Um, we fear the unknown, or many people do. There are adventurers out there, whatever the challenge might be. There are adventurers who are always looking for the unknown. But a lot of people fear the unknown, and so someone who has a different approach to life is the unknown, and that person is to be feared, particularly if those people get into power, whatever those people might be. And so there's this great concern about it. But as you get to know someone who is other than yourself, and you really get to know them, whether we're talking religiously or racially, or even if we come to understand you know, the alternative genders, um, you know, and get to know them and understand some of the challenges that they've been facing, suddenly they're not so fearful, and suddenly they become much more human. And suddenly we want to make sure that we're not disadvantaging them in a way that some of the things we once thought would be a pretty good idea really aren't a very good idea. And so I think education is just a huge thing. And as far as the interfaith side of it goes, I think for us to get to know each other better, get to understand what others think, get to know what others really think, as opposed to parroting myths and rumors and secondhand information about others. Um, it can make a huge difference then in us coming together. And we really have a challenge to educate the majority, and particularly when the majority is shrinking. And that's kind of scary for the majority. And Rabbi Neely mentioned, the idea that any loss of privilege that you had and kind of took for granted, it now begins to disappear, and it's a little bit more egalitarian in the way things are done. That's a threat. That's not something you just sit by and take. And so all of those things I think come into play in a big way. And I would just say, as far as my view of Christianity, um, Jesus said that when he gave what we've referred to as the golden rule, treating others as you would like to be treated if the tables were turned, or not doing to others what is detestable to you, to use Rabbi Hillel. To me, Christianity should revolve around that, because Jesus said all the law and prophets, in other words, all the spiritual instruction they'd had up to that point, was really about that issue. And to me, that's the core of Christianity, which means that there has to be an understanding, there has to be a freedom that's granted to everyone, a respect that's given to everyone, and a recognition that we don't do well when we control others. There are limits in that control. We're not doing them a favor, and they don't appreciate what it is that we think we're doing for them. And so I don't see Christian nationalism as really very Christian at all. It has commandeered Christianity as the vehicle to achieve certain things, but
Yes,
it's not living out Christianity as I believe Jesus taught it. And I think it then becomes a very selfish, very self-serving sort of mechanism that we have, and it is wreaking havoc with Christianity. The
yes,
image of Christianity in the broader community, and particularly as we go outside of the United States, even where, in the case of Europe, for example, where it's really a post-Christian society, and they look at these things that are being done in the name of Christianity, and they just can't believe it, and we lose respect all the time. So people ask me what I do. I say I'm a professional Jesus promoter. And I don't think that Christian nationalism promotes Jesus. And it doesn't promote the values that Jesus had. And so I think it would be very wonderful if we could, through interaction, through discussion, through education, if we could help to see the beauty and the benefit of what the founders of our nation had in mind and what they wanted to achieve.
yes. I thank you, and I agree with you, and I think that I think most faiths and even people of conscience would agree that doing unto others as you would have done unto you is a basic tenet of being a human being, that, we can all, at least we can start from there.
Absolutely.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Rabbi Neely, you recently gave a sermon, sorry, outlining how the elevated anti-Semitism and discrimination of the Jewish community, and how the Jewish community faces limits of the places where that community may feel safe. Could you share a bit of that message, and explain a little bit how that would relate to other populations, such as the LGBTQ folks and other in Florida and across the United States, and just other marginalized communities that may find themselves not safe where they are living and need to go somewhere else.
So the sermon that I gave, the basic topic was, of course, retracking a little bit of my family history, which you mentioned at the outset. My family on my mother's side were originally part of Spain and were forced in the time of the Spanish expulsion to begin living in secret, to pretend to be Christian while remaining Jewish in private, as a way of accommodating the coercive power of the king and queen of Spain at the time. Now, many other Jews opted for other options, which was to leave, to go to many of the other countries of the Mediterranean, of North Africa, and other parts of Europe. My own family did also choose eventually to immigrate to the New World, first to Mexico and then New Mexico before they were under American control. And the Inquisition continued to follow. And that's really what I was trying to help people understand, is that at the time there were other options, but those options were dwindling. And by the time we've reached 2025, the options for where to run away from this have become, well, vanishingly small. About 90% of the Jewish population live either in the United States or Israel. It's about 45% of the population in each. Israel, as everybody knows, has its own existential problems, and it's also a very small strip of land. And doubling its population by having American Jews all move there to avoid Christian nationalism in America is not a viable solution. And at the same time, the countries of the Mediterranean, North Africa, or Europe are not exactly going to throw open their doors to millions of Jewish immigrants either. This is our country here in America, and I do consider myself a patriot who loves this country, and I have no intention of leaving it. I have no intention of disappearing simply because my presence is inconvenient or offensive to some. And I will remind you that there are people currently sitting in our Congress in Washington who fought hard to make sure that it would not be under the definition of anti-Semitism to say that Jesus was killed by the Jews. So there is still a great deal of animosity. One of the questions in our Q&A chat asked about the role of anti-Semitism in Christian nationalism. And there is a surprising element of that. Many people feel that Christian nationalists are often very pro-Israel. Well, I will remind you, first of all, that being pro-Israel does not mean you're being pro-Jewish people. And being pro-Jewish people does not mean you're being pro-Israel. And this has caused a great deal of confusion and tension. But essentially, many Christian nationalists support Israel as what they imagine, incorrectly, is a template for a religious ethnic state. They misunderstand the diversity of Jews in Israel. They misunderstand the role of religion within the state of Israel. But they support Israel thinking that this is, regardless of their religious ideas, that this is a template for what they would like to make America. Now, they're wrong about Israel. They're wrong about what America should be. Now, how does this affect us here in Florida and currently? Well, I will say that I have had, over the last 15 years, not a single bar mitzvah student that has sat and talked with me that has not experienced direct, overt anti-Semitism. Sometimes just at the hands of other students. Often that was allowed to continue despite the school knowing about it. Sometimes by the school itself directly. Discriminatory policies that have been very difficult, and the incidences have continued to rise. There is clearly an intention to make it uncomfortable to be openly Jewish within those populations. It comes as no surprise, I'm sure, to our panelists, but perhaps our other attendees are not as aware that this effort has been perpetrated against other communities within Florida as well, drawing their rhetoric from their religiosity They have targeted people who are LGBTQ. They have targeted women. They have targeted people of different racial ancestries as also being unwelcome or in need of being put into their place. And I should point out that while these are often labeled as other communities, all of those are found within my own congregation, let alone the broader population. I have members that are LGBT that have had to flee the state because they were being denied access to their medication. I have had people that have had to change university or no longer are seeking to remain in Florida after receiving an education because the academic world is not as welcoming to a divergent point of view. We know that there is already an increase in discriminatory hiring. Just about a month ago, there was another executive order giving federal workers permission to proselytize in the federal workplace, including supervisors to their subordinates. And that is indicative of the coercive attempt to try and change people from the faith that they have chosen into the faith that someone else is choosing for them. All of this, you'll see, is very much built around the idea of there should be a particular hierarchy, that there needs to be a pyramid of status. And that is really one of the underlying problems that this entire situation is built around, is that there should be people on top and people underneath, and many people are willing to be in the middle as long as they know there is someone under them. They are willing to put up with being ordered around by someone higher on the totem pole as long as they know there's someone else they can step on. And that is one of the fundamental issues that we can see playing out in our public schools. We can see being played out in our halls of Congress, and we can see it being played out in the workplace and in community forums, is people want others to respect their authority, their position, their status, and not have to go through the difficult process of convincing someone else that you are right, of persuading someone else that your policy is beneficial to all, but instead simply demanding that that be accepted for no reason other than who they are.
Thank you. I also I heard what you said about the intersectionality, which is what Representative was talking about earlier, of that you can be Jewish, you can be gay, you can be like 10,000 different things could be in one person. And you're not just a white male. So I think a lot of people don't think about that. Representative Rayner, what are some of the specific policies that reflect Christian nationalism coming out of Tallahassee that you have seen imported to other states? So rather than it happened in Texas and now it's coming here, like it happened here, now it's going to North Carolina or Tennessee.
I mean, well, how long is this broadcast?
One or two. I know there's 10,000.
I mean, it was interesting because I was having a conversation with a reporter today, and one of the very first things that we talked about was stand your ground, which was Florida was the first state. And stand your ground is basically, this whole idea of you have the right to, shoot and kill someone if you are where you are lawfully able to be. And it was a policy that was promoted by the NRA and ALEC to really increase more gun ownership. And that also comes from a framing of Christian nationalism. So you see that starting as early as 2008, right? And then, really Florida has become the test ground for, we're seeing, the banning of books that started in Florida. That was not something that you really saw elsewhere. Florida started it, and then Texas said, hold my beer. The Don't Say Gay bills, the anti-trans bills that really were rooted, it started in Florida. And then you saw states like Ohio, you saw states like North Carolina, I believe Utah and Idaho looked at those that legislation that was passed and modeled legislation off of that, the Stop Woke Act, right? So anything that is DEI or woke, you see the current national policies that were actually modeled after that bill. What was found in Project 2025, a lot of the legislation started in Florida, was the test ground for it. So not only has it been imported to other states, but it's also been infused into the national platform of the current administration and some of their policies.
Thank you. It's yeah, it's a crazy world. I can't remember that there's a movie that there's some saying, and I can't remember it right now, but it's a crazy, crazy world, and we gotta there, just somehow, I don't know how you stop it, but there's gotta be some small ways to cut into it in some way. Pastor Coffin, what successes have you seen in interfaith organizing, and what do you find are some of the obstacles, and what are some of the best messaging that we can use?
I think that it doesn't necessarily take a total revolution to make quite a difference. If you can affect a few people who then affect other people who affect other people, this can spread out. And we tried to do a lot of education about when I was the director of the Interfaith Council. We started out with the idea of religion, helping us to understand each other's religion. And then we wanted to go to other barriers that exist between human beings. So wherever there was a barrier that existed, whether it was religious or some other issue, racial, gender, you name it, we wanted to break down those barriers as much as we could, understand each other more fully. And I think that we didn't take the world by storm and suddenly change and transform the Central Florida. At the same time, though, I think that enough people read things we wrote in the paper. They went to events that we held that were interfaith events where we got to know each other. The series we ran about getting to know my neighbors, and we'd have those presented. I think it made a significant difference, although it didn't resolve the problem. It didn't take it away, but it was well worth the effort that we put into it. And one of the things that I probably am most proud of, as far as my role in the Interfaith Council, is that we brought atheists, skeptics, whatever name we want to give that group, free thinkers. We brought them into the Interfaith Council, and my rationale for that was that we come together as a group of faith-based things, faith-based people. If faith means that you have to believe in a God, well, there are some groups that are recognized as faiths that never really have had a God in the picture. They may have some activities that resemble that, like Buddhism. So I looked at faith as being more an organizing principle that you have whereby you govern your life. It's a value system that you hold that leads to the way you govern your life. Well, it seemed to me that the atheists and the agnostics and so on have a principle that they operate on that governs their lives, and the best place for them to be in discussion about issues would be with the faith groups. And even though they're different, and so we went through some steps to get the non-believer group, if you want to call them that, involved in the Interfaith Council. And I think that was a very good move forward. Now, of course, that would be very threatening to people who have a very narrow view of religion and faith and so on. But I think that it's good because I think the faith groups were understood better by non-believers, and the non-believers were understood much better by faith groups. And then we tried to find common ground where we could agree, even though we might not go all the way. For example, with the LGBTQ issues. There are some faith groups that were not going to be as accepting and as fully embracing as other groups were. But almost without exception, we could move several steps in a more humane, more loving, more caring, more supportive posture. Even if they still had this, well, this is contrary to our belief system, it was hard to deny, particularly the Christian groups, it's hard to deny that Jesus sort of said that you needed to love everybody. And so therefore you might disagree with them, but you have this obligation to love and to do those things that are going to be supportive and helpful and reduce stress and pain and suffering. And so I think that by not always trying to go the whole way to what might be a final goal, even to move significant steps in the right direction, was a very worthwhile exercise. I recognize that there are incrementalists and there are those who are revolutionary, and they don't always, but it can take both working together. And so I think that I do believe that while faith in general, and Christianity, I think, has suffered more because of its own actions, I think that faith in general is declining. I still think that it has enough power collectively, all the different faith traditions working together, or representatives, progressive representatives of those groups, that it can still make a significant impact. And we did a few statements on various issues, and it seemed to me more powerful when we can say Buddhists and Hindus and Christians and Jews and Muslims and Sikhs, all recognize, this value. And
Right.
And so the more we can speak with a united voice, the better.
I think I agree with you with it. It's just love. It goes back to the golden rule. Like,
That's precisely
you
it.
have to give the other people the grace and the love that they deserve as much as you want it for yourself.
Right.
And that's what so
Yeah.
I think that's a great way. And one of the interfaith coalitions that I have put together, we've embraced the atheists because we see them as people of conscience. It's a
Precisely.
moral values and all of that. So in the next, we're getting close on time, but in the next few minutes, I want to see if some of our people on the back end, on the inside, could help us with any questions from the audience. If there's any in particular that stand out.
Laura, there's a few people asking what an individual can do to effectively counter the rise of Christian nationalism.
Anybody have a comment about what an individual can do in their personal life? Yep.
I'm happy to chime in, and I'm sure that others will have different things. Obviously, some of the ones we've already mentioned: support interfaith work, watch the legislation, work towards changing the minds of representatives and the like. There are some other more out of the way things that you can also advocate for. Right now, many of our congressional seats are essentially safe seats, and safe seats breed extremism. So working together to change redistricting so that seats remain competitive would go a long way towards diminishing the power of these extreme voices. But one thing I'd like to point out that's incredibly powerful, we saw it have huge impact on the same-sex marriage issue, is to actually talk to people about this and to listen what they are afraid of, what they are feeling, what they are hoping to accomplish. Because oftentimes within just 10, 15, 20 minutes of conversation, they will talk themselves out of a more extreme position into something more moderate. You see, one of the problems that many of the people who are working on this issue is to come along and say, this is all terrible, because it is, and therefore the people who hold all of these views must all be terrible. And that's the flaw, because many of these people are rightly upset about the state of their life, the state of the world, the state of the country, and they may have legitimate grievances, and they're reaching for the wrong solution. And if you refuse to listen to them simply because they have jumped to the wrong conclusion, then not only are you missing the chance to perhaps work with them for real solutions, but you are also going to drive them away from further conversation. Make no mistake, for many people, Christian nationalism is something that they are drawn to because they look at it as being an alternative to the community or family structure that has degraded over the last 100 years. This is not to say that it's the wrong mores or values or whatever, but the rise of industrialization and the construction of our communities and cities in the current form has made it very hard for people to form tight networks, tight communities, and even maintain extended family structures. I know just from when I was growing up, I spent a lot more time with my cousins than my children are spending with theirs. And that is not a choice. That is simply a facet of how we have organized modern life. And many people will drift towards Christian nationalism and its promise that everything will be set right again, that there they will belong, there they will have place, they will have status, they will have honor, and all the things that we normally would get from a vibrant, healthy community of a cross-section of the country and a vibrant, deep family connection. So be that community for them, be that family for them, make them realize that if they are going to legislate hate, that they are legislating against you, and that you don't want that you respect them, you care for them, you want them to have a good and happy life. You just don't want to be the scapegoat for the way for them to achieve that. And finally, when talking to people who are on this in this border zone, remind them that legislating Christianity or any religion for that matter doesn't work well, because it turns out that for each individual there is a particular version of Christianity as an ideal, or Judaism as their ideal, or Islam as their ideal, and you will continue to see legislation that is narrowing and narrowing, meaning increasing and increasing the number of blasphemers that must be attacked. More Christians have died at the hands of other Christian fanatics than have died at the hands of any other religion that has ever come into contact with them. And we have to remember that the founders, for whatever knock-on effect it's given to someone like me, when they were talking about religious freedom, they were especially worried about Christian versus Christian violence, not necessarily just Christian versus others, and helping Christians realize that it's in their best interest to maintain this separation of church and state, because there's very little to guarantee they're going to be at the winning 1% of the lottery of Christian denomination that ends up in power. It is a very powerful tool.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm going to mush together a few questions into like one. So the quote unquote MAGA community claims that, we're a Christian country. Look, we follow a Christian calendar, basically. This is when we have off school. This is when the banks are closed, etc. And how does that jive with the Establishment Clause of our Constitution? And what do you think the Supreme Court may or may not have any play in that at some point? Like, how does that all kind of, like I said, I mushed a few questions together into one.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I want to chime
Go
in
ahead.
for that. One, I think kind of working backwards, I think Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and I'm going to chop up her dissent, but in one of her more recent dissents that she said, I fear the court is aiding in the decline of democracy. And so, working our way backwards is that this is why, and I can say this as nonpartisan, elections matter, because you see the rise of Christian nationalism and how it's being infused not only in our policies, but being upheld by the courts. Even though some of these things may or may not be not constitutional or not actually comport with the law. But then if you have folks who are appointed to the Supreme Court, such like, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who is who's well known for her I say quote unquote pro-life views and those types of things. And so much so you see Justice Brett Kavanaugh, you see that is infused in the way that they make their decisions and the way that they vote when it comes to legislation. So I think in a lot of ways, the establishment clause is nice and it's great. Yes, it's in the Constitution, but we see it being trampled over year after year after year after year. And this is not something that just happened. This is something that has been consistent for the last, I would say, 50 plus years. And so, one, the fact of the matter is it is violating a lot of the policies that we see. They are violating the establishment clause. Number two, I think that the Supreme Court as it is right now is going to aid in that decline of democracy and is going to aid into the promotion of Christian nationalist policies and views. And as far as, the MAGA people saying that we live in a Christian country, I don't know what Jesus they're talking to. Is literally not mine, because that's not the Jesus I ascribe to. So sure. And to the point that I think the rabbi made, everyone's view, even those who proclaim this Christian nationalism, everyone's view of religion and faith is very different. And because here in America, even the evangelical culture has made it very individualistic, right? How does this benefit me? A God of our own making. So once again, this whole idea that we live in a Christian nation is very rich, but it's unrealistic. But unfortunately, those narrow views have found its way into legislation and unfortunately into the court.
If I
Thank
could
you.
just make an additional comment, it's
Sure.
substantially different to have a Christian majority nation and to have a Christian nation. And so the history of this country, we came from the majority of immigrants came from areas where Christianity was also already predominant. So it's inevitable that they bring a lot of their Christian traditions and so on. And so we have this Christian majority, but our founders wanted to make sure that we didn't replicate what had gone on before. And so they said, okay, you've got the power. It's a Christian majority nation, but we're going to relinquish that power. And we put into the Constitution such things as there shall be no religious test, and for office. If it was a Christian nation, well, then you'd say, well, okay, let's just only let
Right.
Christians in. But there were very deliberate steps that were taken to make sure that it was recognized as not being a Christian nation, even though it was a Christian majority nation.
If
That's
I can
great.
just, I'm sorry, if I
I
can
like
just,
you defining that difference. That's very great. That's great.
I
Yep.
was going to say, if I could just build off what Pastor Coffin just said, as somebody who isn't Christian, obviously, I fully expect when I drive around my neighborhood to see Christmas lights on all the homes during the that time of year. That's perfectly fine. But when the government mandates that everybody have a symbol of Christmas, that's where we hit the problem. If a Christian says, I want to not go shopping on Sunday. I'm going to avoid doing work on God's day, the blue laws that many people used to have. That's fine if they choose that as a personal expression. I don't go shopping on my Shabbat, which happens to be Friday night through Saturday. But I do not believe that I should legislate that on someone else. And if it is legislated by Christians, as it used to be in this country, that people were not allowed to do certain things on Sundays, well, that becomes discriminatory for those of us who also don't do things on Saturdays. So, you have an additional week, day of the week gone because of their sensibilities. And again, I just want to continue to reiterate this. This is not about telling a person they can't believe what they want or they can't live the life they want. This is simply about saying there has to be a wall which prevents their belief and their personal choice from being imposed upon others. And I have to say that for those that were asking about the Supreme Court, we should never have thought the Supreme Court would save us. It is one of the failings, if you will, of many people of good intentions to believe that no matter how bad it gets, at least the Supreme Court will strike it down. People were heady off many of the wins of the Supreme Court, such as Roe v. Wade and Brown versus Board of Education and other things which made things much easier for many of us in minority status. But we never should have counted on that as always being the backstop. The Supreme Court can be changed. Those who wanted the current Supreme Court worked for decades to make it look the way it is. Those of us who don't like that orientation or who wish to change policy have to put in the same amount of effort. We have to work hard to make things work right. There isn't another alternative, and that means we don't give up. We don't say, oh, we've lost, because the Supreme Court and other political things have been different in the past, and then they were better. Now some things are worse. That means we just have to work that much harder. We have done so much in the past to make this country live up to its ideals. The game ain't over. It's not even halftime. There is still everything to play for, and we are still able to change it because again and again, the people who are advocating for the Christian nationalism are not the majority. They aren't even the majority of Christians. And we have to hold the country accountable to that. And everyone needs to speak up and do something, however local, however national, to make sure this isn't allowed to happen without us putting up a damn good fight.
Thank you, Rabbi. We have to work on the other two branches of the government because
and each other and our neighbors
and each other. We're a little stuck with the Supreme Court for a while. But thank you all so much. I did have one last question, but before I ask it, I just want to thank all of our participants again and our sponsors and co-sponsors. I mentioned all of them in the beginning, but I did want to ask one last question. Just if any of you think that we're at a point where each of us individually may need to ask ourselves, how far are we willing to go, as we have asked ourselves in the past, in the 60s, in other historical moments, where are we ready to get handcuffed? Are we ready to be in a position where are we at that point? And I know that's a big question, but it's one where I think I've been in a lot of spaces where that question is really in the front. Representative Michele.
Oh, okay. I think the short answer is yes. I mean, I think we are at that place. I'm actually representing the two pastors here in St. Pete that got arrested for praying at the Black History Matters mural while it was being painted over, and and exercising their right to civil disobedience. And I think that our accomplices, our allies, And even ourselves who may be a part of a marginalized or oppressed group have to count the costs. And I've shared this with a lot of folks. I think we're in a moment where this has to be our profile and courage moment. And your profile and courage moment may not look like mine, and that's okay. But whatever your profile and courage moment is, it may be at the Thanksgiving table telling your uncle to shut up and going in. I don't know what that is. I mean, or it could be like mine and my colleagues when we went down to Alligator Alcatraz and tried to get in. Whatever your profile, or it could be like the pastors that decided to kneel and pray and would not get up until they had to be drug away at the mirror. Whatever your profile and courage moment is, that is what we need to do in this moment. And also understanding it does not have to look like everyone else. And it may not even result in being handcuffed. But if it's a moment that causes you to step outside of your comfort zone for the greater good and for what is right, then that is what I think the moment that we're in, and that folks should oughta lean into that.
Thank you. I like that. Profile and courage. It's great. Anybody else have a comment?
I again will reiterate, I don't know that we have a choice. Emigration is not an option for the vast majority of us. There isn't some other place to go, just if we don't feel like we're going to fix here. And as someone who comes from a family who hid for 500 years, and only by the most outstanding set of circumstances were able to rediscover our heritage, I have no intention of hiding again. And I don't think anyone should have to live in hiding in this country. So no, we need to do everything we possibly can. There are no options. So whether you're ready or not, this is what we need.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Reverend Pastor Jim, Rabbi Neely, Representative Michele. Y'all, your input was unbelievable and so well thought out, and we really appreciate your participation in this. We look forward to part 2 of this webinar series, which has been being posted in the chat, and people are already signing up. There are also a couple of other events coming up. Pittsburgh Initiatives Program on Religious Extremism and Anti-Science with Dr. Pete Hotez is on September 16th. We have another Call With Us webinar on September 29th. And here in Florida, Jews for a Secular Democracy, along with Keshet, NCJW, and a whole bunch of other people, Florida Now, will be at Pride Orlando on October 18th. And we'll also be holding a Pride Shabbat at a volunteer's home on Friday night to celebrate that the pride of our community. And I want to thank everyone again. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And we hope to see you at our next webinar, part 2. Thank you.